Okay, and hello once again. We are moving on to video number 2. And here's exactly what we're going to be talking about. Crime, the criminal justice system, all of the above. Um, what is the definition of crime? That is something that you should know, you should understand, because there are a lot of variations and a lot of various things that we do as a human in society. And some of those actions, you may wonder what makes them criminal versus what just makes them deviant. And we'll talk about that here. So, the definition of crime is the violation of the laws of a society by a person or group of people who are subject to the laws of that society. Thus, crime as defined by the state or federal government. Essentially, crime is what the law states, and a violation of the law stated in the statute would make actions criminal. So here's an interesting example. I took this right out of your text. Is feeding the hungry a crime? So what do you think? So Adele McClain joined others in an Atlanta park to feed the hungry the Sunday before Thanksgiving and was given a citation and a summons to appear in court. Ultimately, McClain's case was dropped when she showed up in court, but she and her lawyers argue the citation for serving food without a permit was improper and demonstrates callousness toward homelessness. So, what do you think? Do you think she should have been given a summons? Do you think that what she did was illegal? So the city and some advocates say feeding people on the streets can hinder long-term solutions and raises sanitation concerns. So it's kind of like the other side of the coin. We have programs in place to try to help get people off the streets. We have programs in place to try to feed the homeless or feed people that are in need in a setting and in an environment where the food is safe, regulated, it's checked by health agencies. So what if somebody just wanted to feed a bunch of people in a park, but the food was not safe and made people sick or die? So I think that we can talk about, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. Can you believe that someone would be sent to court for such a good deed? But I think we need to think of the big picture when we're looking at situations like this. So when we're looking at crime, obviously, we're also talking about the criminal justice system, because when someone commits a crime, they end up being a part of the criminal justice system to some degree or another. So the definition of the criminal justice system is a major social institution that is tasked with controlling crime in various ways. Police are often tasked with detecting crime and detaining individuals. Courts often adjudicate and hand down punishments, and the correction system implements punishments and or rehabilitative efforts for people who have been found guilty of breaking the law. So we have enforcement of the law, then we have court system, and then we have our correction system. So those are the 3 systems that you might move through should you commit a crime. And what is the process of this crime? So although agencies may operate differently, the way cases move through the criminal justice system is consistent. And as I mentioned in the last slide, so the first step after getting caught stealing something from a store is involvement with police when law enforcement is called. So just basically you commit a crime and the police of some kind get involved. The next step in the process is to proceed through the court system to determine guilt or innocence. So you start in the court system and you plead your case, however that may happen. Sometimes your case may go to trial, or perhaps you're working with a public defender and the case is dismissed for some reason, or someone takes a plea deal. So if you're found guilty, then you receive a sentence that will be carried out in the next step. So if you've taken the case and maybe you've pled guilty or you're found guilty, regardless, after conviction or after you're found guilty, you move to the correctional system for formal punishment and or treatments as determined by the courts. So with many crimes, it is not that you commit a crime and go to jail. And this is seen in many various misdemeanor type crimes that don't need a a correctional institution type sentence. Like, you don't need to go to jail or to prison. And in the state of New Hampshire, the difference between a jail and a prison usually is the term of your sentence. Most jails are for if you're awaiting trial, or you're awaiting your sentence, or you've received a sentence of less than 1 year. Prison, on the other hand, is where you go once you've received a sentence, and oftentimes it's where you would go if your sentence is greater than 1 year. So what you can look at is that a jail might be for lesser offenses once sentenced, and a prison would be for sentences that are a little harsher, maybe perhaps due to a more serious crime. So, like I was mentioning, an individual may not go through the entire process, and criminal justice officials decide whether the case should continue on to the next phase or stage. Perhaps the officer decides not to cite you and your contact with law ends there. However, it may be the district attorney or the DA that decides to drop your case even before it goes to trial. Or, like I said, you may take some type of a plea deal where before you go to trial, you accept some type of a sentence that everyone agrees upon. But regardless, the process is typically, to simplify it, cops, courts, and then corrections. Next week, I will have information more about those specifics. So when we're looking at what someone does, okay, and we're looking at, why are some people go to jail? Why are some people convicted and others aren't? Or, what does it take to actually be arrested and go to jail? Well, one of the things that we do talk about is deviance. And this is behavior that departs from the social norm. So Eric Good, who's a sociology professor at Stony Brook University, he wrote a book, and he argues that 4 things must happen in order for something deviant to take place or exist. So he says that there's a rule or a norm that must be established, and then someone has to violate that rule or norm. There must be an audience or someone that witnesses the act or judges it to be wrong. And there is likely going to be a negative reaction from that audience that can come in many forms, like criticism, disapproval, punishment, and more. So typically in our society, a deviant act becomes criminal, and that can be prohibited and punished under criminal law when a crime is deemed socially harmful or dangerous to society. So deviance doesn't necessarily mean criminal or crime. A deviant act has to be able to be punished when that crime or that deviance is deemed to be socially harmful or dangerous. So there are other deviant things that people can do, but if they're not harmful or dangerous to society, then they're just considered deviant and they're not something that you can be arrested on. And take a moment to think about some examples, like, what is the difference between crime and deviance? And in criminology, we often cover a wide array of harms that can include economic, physical, emotional, social, and environmental. The critical thing to note is that we do not want to create laws against everything in society. So we must draw a line between what we consider deviant and unusual versus dangerous and criminal. All right, so that's something that you really need to think about when we're reflecting about crime and punishment. So how then, what's happened? How have people determined, what constitutes a crime? So first of all, we have to define what is a criminalized act. And that is when a deviant act becomes criminal and a law is written. with defined sanctions that can be enforced by the criminal justice system. And you can see this a lot, that oftentimes you'll hear about a new law is passed because someone did something and no one had really thought about before how to handle that, and a new law ends up being passed due to that deviant behavior or deviant act. And I'll give you an example of that in Canvas for you, an example for you to take a look at. We have a couple views about how things become criminalized. There is an interactionist view, and that states that the definition of a crime reflects the preferences and opinions of people who hold social power in a particular legal jurisdiction. And then other perspectives about how we define crime and create laws. One view is the consensus view. This implies that there is consensus or agreement among citizens on what should and should not be illegal. This idea implies that all groups come together, regardless of social class, race, age, gender, and more, to determine what should be illegal. This view also suggests that criminal law is a function of beliefs, morality, and rules that apply equally to all members of society. And then there's the conflict view. This sees society as a collection of diverse groups that can include owners, workers, wealthy, poor, students, professionals, younger, older, and more. This view recognizes that the creation of laws is unequal and may not have consensus, like in the example discussed previously. Further, the conflict view suggests that these groups are often in constant conflict with one another. Unlike the consensus view, which I mentioned above, the conflict view would suggest that the crime definitions are controlled by those with wealth, power, and social position in society. So, what do you think? How do you think we determine what is a crime and what to create laws about? Do you think we are using mostly the consensus view or the conflict view? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you to head over to Canvas, because I have an exercise for you to take a look at about kind of what we've talked about. And like I said, I'm sorry that I had to be off campus today. I'm still shocked that I have a fever. I don't think I would have known unless I had to check before I went to campus. And I appreciate you taking the time to view the presentation. Like I said, in the modules tab, I will have the week of September 17th class, and everything will be found right in there. As always, let me know if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing you on October 1st, our next class.